Hello guys, in this video let's understand what is Azure VM. Now guys, you may have a question that why we are discussing VM in this networking tutorial, right? So it's because we will host our web app in this VM. Now you may have another question that we can host our web app in app service as well, right? So yes, we will be using app service as well to host our web app in our upcoming videos. Now in this video we will create VM, and for that OS it will be Windows. We will also discuss the pricing as well of VM. Now when we create VM, we will host it in VNet and subnet which we created in our last video. So guys, if you don't have VNet and subnet created, that's okay. You can create VNet and subnet while creating VM itself, so that's okay. And finally, after our VM is created, we will observe the public IP and private IP of that VM. So guys, as of now we have not discussed what is this public IP, what is private IP, and what is public IP versus private IP. So we will discuss public IP versus private IP in our next video. And now first let's discuss what is this Azure VM. So basically guys, when we create a VM in Azure, of course we get RAM, that is memory, we get CPU, and we get storage. But behind the scene, this VM, it will be hosted on some physical server, right? That is some host machine. So let's say this is the host machine, and on top of this our VM, it got hosted. So this is host machine or physical server. So basically Azure has something called hypervisor. Okay, so Azure has something called hypervisor, and using it can host VM. So basically our VM, it will be hosted on top of this host machine. So let's say our VM, it got created over here. Now this host machine and this hypervisor, it is managed by Azure itself. So we don't have any control over this. That is again on this hypervisor and this host machine. But we have full control over this VM. That is this VM, we have full control. In fact, Azure does not even look inside what is there in this VM. So we are fully responsible to manage this VM ourselves. So for example, if we install any illegal software or if there is cyber attack on this VM, we have to manage it ourselves. And now let's quickly discuss about cost of VM. Now when we create VM, so of course we have to pay the cost for this VM, that is the RAM and CPU which we use, right? But in addition, we have to pay cost for disk as well. So for example, we can specify whether we need premium disk or SSD disk, and we have to pay for the cost of IP address as well. So for example, if we create static IP for this VM, so of course for that also we have to pay. So essentially the cost of VM is cost of VM itself plus cost of disk plus cost of IP address. So please remember that. Okay, so when we have created VM and when our work with VM is completed and now we want to delete the VM, so ideally delete entire resource group, that is resource group of VM. So when we delete this VM plus this disk plus this IP address, all these components, they will get deleted. But if you delete just this VM, okay, so this disk and this IP address, they may still continue to exist and you may have to continue to pay. So I think guys, that's enough for the theory. Now let's go to the Azure portal and let's create our first VM. So guys, we are in Azure portal and let's click on this virtual machines, that is VM. Let's say create Azure Virtual Machine. Now let's create new resource group. So I will say create new, and here I will say rg-vm, as in it contains all the resources for this VM. Okay. Now let's give name to our VM. So I will say VM for web app. Now let's keep region as Australia center, and guys, this availability option. So as of now I will say no infrastructure redundancy is required. Okay, so I'm not going in detail of this. Now image, so let's select this Windows Server 2022. So obviously you can go down and you can create image as per your requirement, but as of now I will stick to this, that is Windows Server 2022 Data Center Azure Edition. Now let's go down, and here now we have to select size. So basically it represents the RAM, that is memory, and CPU which we need. So obviously as you can guess, more CPU and more RAM, so more the price. Okay, so if I click on this see all sizes, so of course all these options you have, and as you select more CPUs and more RAM, so of course the cost is also high. Okay, so again I'm not going in detail of this, so let's simply close this. And as of now we have selected this, that is D2S V3. Okay, and guys this is important thing, run with Azure Spot discount. Okay, so if I take my mouse to this and see what it says that Azure Spot offers unused Azure capacity at a discounted rate. So when you are working for your local development, always select this option, that is spot discount, and it's really very cost effective. So for example, see I have not selected this spot discount as of now, and you can see the cost is 14,000 per month. Okay, but if I tick this checkbox and you see it just 1661, so cost has dramatically reduced. Okay, so for our local development we should always select this spot discount. Now let's go down, and here of course now we need to provide the username and password for our Windows VM. So I will say username VM for web app. Now let's provide the password. Now under inbound ports, let's keep this RDP, that is we should be able to connect to this VM using remote desktop connection. Now next, now let's click on this next, that is disks. Now let's go down, and disk type we don't need premium SSD, so let's simply select the standard SSD so we can reduce the cost further. Now let's click on this next, that is networking. And guys this is important, and under this networking section we have to provide the VNet and subnet, that is essentially it's subnet, that is a subnet within which this VM will reside. Okay, so of course you can create new VNet and new subnet as well on the fly, but we have already created VNet and subnet in our last video, and there we discussed IP address range as well in detail, so I will select that only. So from this drop down I will select this our first VNet, that is the VNet which we created in our previous video, and obviously let's select subnet as well, and let's select this, that is our first subnet. And now we need to assign public IP to this VM, right? So let's click on this create new, and the name of this public IP for this VM, it will be VM for web app -IP. So we are okay with this name, and I will say okay. Now let's go down and let's keep other things as default, and now here I will say review plus create. And now guys, before we click on create, observe this right hand side, so it shows the estimated cost for this VM, and if you see it has three components, that is basics, disk and networking. So basically under basics it shows the cost of this VM, that is we have selected image and we have selected RAM and CPU, so that is the cost of VM. Then under disk we have selected standard SSD, and then under networking we have selected IP address, right? So again the cost of VM is cost of VM itself plus cost of disk plus cost of IP address which we are going to assign to this VM. Okay, now here I will click on this create. And guys, if you observe, it says your deployment is complete, that means our VM has been created. So let's click on this go to resource. So guys, we are in this VM and we are under overview. Now guys, observe first thing, it shows the size. So the size of our VM is, it is D2S V3 and it has 2 CPU and 8 GB of RAM. So this is exactly what we selected. Okay, and observe this public IP address. So if we want to connect to this VM from public internet, we will use this IP address only. So for example, we can remote desktop to this IP address and we can connect to this VM. Okay, now let's go down. Guys, observe this, something called private IP address. So it is 10.0.0.4. So basically what it means is any resource within the same virtual network of this VM, that resource can connect to this VM using this private IP address. But of course that resource, it has to be in the same virtual network within which this VM resides. Okay, so again this is private IP address. And one more thing guys, if you observe, the IP address is 10.0.0.4. so this IP address is one of the IP address from that IP address range of virtual network. So if I duplicate this tab, so again we are in this VM and let's open the virtual network for this VM. And let's click on this address space. See guys, this address range, it is 10.0.0.0 to 10.0.255, right? And this private IP of this VM is one of the IP address from that IP address range. Okay, so that's it guys. Thanks for listening.